How's it going, YouTube? Your boy Chill here. Hopefully y'all have been doing Edge of Fate. I gotta tell y'all, your boy is kind of burned after prepping here for that day one raid. I gotta tell you, that was rough. But your boy's here, got some rest. I'm all good now. I ain't even gonna talk about what happened for the day one raid. If you want to ask me about that, spot by the Twitch stream if I'm live, and I'll tell you all about it. But anyways, now that everything's all caught up and I got some rest, I'm bringing some build videos for y'all today. So in this video, I'm going to be talking about the new Titan exotic with Edge of Fate called Melas Panoplia. Now, I was kind of skeptical about this exotic. It seemed kind of niche. It was just more of a gimmicky exotic. But after doing some testing and fine-tuning of a build for it, I gotta say, it's pretty nice. It does all right. Like, it can hang in some content. Like, I'll give it that. So, yeah, I got a build for y'all today. I'm going to be talking about the exotic, some weapons and artifact mods you want to pair with the build. So, hopefully y'all enjoy this. Like, comment, subscribe if you do. And let's just get into it. Now again, the Titan exotic is called Melas Panoplia. If you don't know how to acquire this, you can get this from the Edge of Fate legendary campaign at the very end after completing all the missions. Or I believe Sieve with the special Vex encounter with Moat Dunking does drop it as well. I don't know if that's tied to have unlocking it previously, but I've been getting multiple copies from there. So if you don't have it, you can go that way as well. Now, the exotic perk of this is called Forge Master. Collecting a Fire Sprite or Rapid Solar Final Blows make you a Forge Master, allowing you to recall your throwing hammer. Now, for the Rapid Solar Final Blows part, you need to get 3 consecutive Solar Final Blows in order to get Forge Master with that. And of course, collecting a Fire Sprite immediately procs Forge Master. Now, a detail I want to point out, Forge Master, whenever initially procced, does not start its timer unless you throw your hammer. So whenever you do have Forge Master queued up and ready to go, ideally you want to save it until there's some ads nearby that you want to toss your hammer to, then start going off. There's a nice kind of benefit to it, so just a little thing to note for that. The second part is after impacting a target, recall your hammer at full intensity to perform a perfect recall, causing an explosion of forged slag. Now that explosion is pretty nice. I will say its damage is pretty hefty. From the damage numbers I was seeing in the testing range, I was seeing 1015 damage per explosion. Now, again, that could be relative to the enemies nearby the explosion to it. It might be a small radius, so keep that in mind. But it is pretty hefty. I do got to give it that. It's a sizable explosion, so it can get a horde of ads pretty effectively. Last part states perfect recalls and collecting fire sprites extend your time as a Forge Master. So whenever performing a perfect recall and a fire sprite, it does add 4 seconds roughly about to the timer, so you can keep that up for longer. With all that being said, the key things we want to take out of this is that we need to collect fire sprites or get rapid solar final blows. And also, this is reliant on our throwing hammer. So we want to take advantage of our melee. So we'll follow that note. We want to pair solar weapons with this, and we want to have our melee stat as high as possible to increase the damage of our throwing hammer even further. Now, let me go over the kit first up before I go over any other details for this build. For the super, I'm rocking Hammer Assault, but you can also rock Burning Maul if you want to use that as well. I'm rocking Tyrant Barricade. You can also use Rally Barricade if you're taking this into a DPS or raid situation. You need that increased reload speed. Throwing Hammer to take advantage of the exotic itself. Now, a little detail I want to give you all right here. With the recent changes to Armor 3.0 changing our stat values and the way they change Throwing Hammer, you're going to be taking advantage of Throwing Hammer. You need to have at least 70 melee stat to get your full hammer back whenever picking it up. If you have less than that, you'll get a percentage of your melee energy back, but you will not get the full hammer. So the minimum is 70 melee stat in order to get your full hammer. So keep that in mind for any Titan builds for solo. If you're going to make it using Throwing Hammer, you need a minimum of 70. For the grenade, I'm rocking Healing Grenade. However, you want to use a more offensive grenade, you have a couple of options. Solar Grenade, Thermites, whatever one you want to use, go ahead with that. Roaring Flames is going to be the first aspect, and this is going to be the key one to up our damage for our Throwing Hammer even further. Final Blows with solar abilities or ignitions increase the damage of your solar abilities, stacks up to 3. So to go over some damage numbers really quickly. A base Throwing Hammer without overinvestment in melee does 327, times 1 Roaring Flame does 544, times 2 does 762, and times 3 is 979. It effectively makes our hammer do 3 times the damage it normally did with Roaring Flame, so it's going to be key to make it feel more effective in endgame content, so you want to use that. The second one is going to be Soul Invictus. Solar ability final blows, hammer soul impacts, and defeating scorched targets create sunspots. Your abilities regenerate faster and your super drains more slowly while standing on the stun spot. Sunspots apply scorch and deal damage to targets inside. Entering a sunspot applies restoration. Because we're taking advantage of this aspect for sunspots for restoration and also just increasing our ability regen, if you want to swap out Healing Grenade for another offensive grenade, go ahead with that. I just have it for an extra safety cushion, but ideally this is going to be the next one to increase our ability regen and help us create sunspots for more survivability and just helping clear out ads. So moving on to the fragments, the ones I have specifically are for survivability because endgame content is melting a lot of us right now, so we need healing by any means necessary to survive. First one's going to be Ember of Mercy. Whenever reviving an ally, you and nearby allies gain restoration. Picking up a Fire Sprite grants restoration. We're taking advantage of the second part for healing. The second one's going to be Ember Torches to give radiant to you and nearby allies whenever hitting with a melee attack. Again, playing into the exotic more so we get radiant on top of it. The third one's going to be Ember of Searing. Defeating scorched targets grants melee energy and creates a fire sprite. Now the first part, it's not going to be really taken advantage of too much because we have 200 melee and we're going to be picking up our hammer constantly. But the fire sprite part is what we want. So that way we can play into the exotic and get Forge Master up more effectively. And the last one is going to be Ember Vaporeon. Solar weapon or ability final blows extend the duration of restoration and radiant effects applied to you. Now, I believe it was a while back that they nerfed restoration and radiant to be a 4-second timer as opposed to an 8-second at base. So ideally, we want to refresh the timer as much as we can with Empyrean. That's why I have it here. However, if you want to rock something else, go ahead. But this is the one I believe will be better for increasing your survivability odds in endgame content. Now, with all that being said, we want to have investment in melee because we want to take advantage of throwing hammers. And again, having a overinvestment in melee buffs its damage even further. Ideally, 200 melee stat is what we want to go for. For a damage comparison based on the base melee with Roaring Flames, with 200 melee, base hammer does 425 damage, at times when Roaring Flame does 707 damage, times 2 does 990 damage, and times 3 does 1273 damage. So it is a substantial buff to our hammer. Comparing this to an underinvestment in melee stat, you can see it's a substantial buff to our melee damage overall. So we want that overinvestment as much as we can to get that damage buff. Now, there's also ways to overinvest into it even further, pairing a 1-2 punch shotgun. Now, funny enough, because of this exotic and the way it works with throwing hammers and recalling it back, 1-2 punch shotguns are going to have a little bit of a hard time. However, they did release a new one with the Edge of Fate story. The shotgun Principio from Kepler has 1-2 punch. Now again, it's another 1-2 punch shotgun. We're not thinking much of it. However, the key thing about this one that's different from the others is the origin trait. Aiming down sights at a target for a short time loads a homing micro rocket. Now, I didn't think Bungie was crazy enough to do this. However, this origin trait procs 1-2 punch on the shotgun. This rocket has no damage fall off and it homes in from distance. So with this, we're able to aim down at any enemies at any distance to proc 1-2 punch and then throw our throwing hammer. So it alleviates the need of having to rock a 1-2 punch shotgun, be close by to enemies. We can shoot from anywhere, proc it off of an enemy far away in the distance, use it for a boss. It's that strong for this build. However, this is a void shotgun, which is detrimental to our build and what we need for fire sprites and for the solar kit. So if you don't want to use a shotgun, pair another one in the kinetic slot with this. If you want a safer option for 1-2 punch from any distance, this is the good way to go. However, if you want to rock something else, do what you want. Now we need to take advantage of fire sprites. We do have a couple ways with the kit already with scorching targets making fire sprites. However, we can overinvest into that a little bit more. Now I was thinking Dragon's Breath for DPS situations, and of course you can still use that. However, if you want to use a primary option for this, I believe Devil's Ruin is the way to go. Devil's Ruin just got reworked to make final blows create fire sprites intrinsically to the exotic. And upon picking a fire sprite, it enables the high power laser mode for this exotic, and any kills with that laser cause ignitions. So with that, we have ways to build up Roaring Flame stacks from the ignition. We're creating fire sprites and powering up the laser beam to do overpowered damage with just a sidearm. So all that built into this kit already and playing into our Exotic even further, it's perfect. It's the perfect weapon to pair for this. If not that, a Heal Clip Incandescent Solar Weapon would be the best pairing as well. Now for heavies, again, if you're going to more ad clearing situations and more lower end content, I'd say Devil's Ruin. However, if you're going to harder content and require some DPS, I would say Dragon's Breath is probably the best pairing because again, defeating targets with Dragon's Breath does drop fire sprites as well, so we can play into the exotic, but it's also very substantial damage with Dragon's Breath with ignitions and Scourge. So if DPS situations, rock Dragon's Breath. Lower end content, Devil's Ruin. That's the way to go. Going over the armor mods for my helmet, I have hands on so that way I get super energy on melee kills. Nextly, I have heavy ammo finder just because the ammo economy right now is horrible. Ammo is not dropping at all. We need to take advantage of as much finders as we can just to make up for the new ammo system. Definitely heavy ammo finder. Then harmonic siphon so that way our solo weapon final blows create an overpower. For the gauntlets, I'm rocking double heavy handed so that way every melee final blow every 5 seconds will generate overpower. For the chest piece, just your basic resistance mods depending on which activity you're going into, adjust them accordingly. For the boots, I'm rocking 1 recuperation so that way I get health every time for picking up an overpower, playing into our health stat as well. Solar weapon surge so that way our solar weapons gain a small damage bump. And the last one will be solar scavenger if you're taking advantage of this for DPS using Dragon's Breath instead of Devil's Ruin. That way your Dragon's Breath can get more ammo from ammo pickups. For the class item, I have time dilation so that way armor charges have a longer duration. Powerful attraction so that way whenever popping my class ability I pick up orbs of power nearby. Then lastly I have proximity ward so that way whenever performing a finish I gain an overshield. However you want to swap this for either bomber or outreach, go ahead and use that as well. Now due to the nature of the brawler armor set giving high melee stat, we're going to get a secondary stat of health. So unintentionally from this kit you might end up having 100 health, which is not a detriment to the build. It does help us out with survivability whenever picking up orbs of power, so it's not a bad thing. Now the tertiary stat in the armor sets are always randomly rolled, which is the third stat which has a stat bump. So for the main armor sets, you want to have 200 melee, you're going to have 100 health intrinsically just because of the armor set. The remaining investment will either be into weapons, grenade, or super depending on the situation and type of content you're going to bring this build into. That is your kit in its entirety. Now for artifact mods to pair with this build to make it even better, The first one is going to be Fever and Chill, so that way rapid precision hits with solo weapons grant Radiant. Just another way to intrinsically get Radiant on top of what our kit already does. Cauterizing Darkness could be a play if you're not using a 1-2 punch shotgun in the kinetic slot. If you're using a Chill Clip Fusion or the Chill Clip Sidearm, you can use this and get increased damage for all your solar damage sources, including your melee, to buff it even further. So this is an option if you want to take advantage of that. The next one is going to be Radiant Shrapnel, dealing sustained weapon damage while radiant and defeating scorched targets with a weapon causes the target to release solar projectiles that deal damage and scorch on impact. Now, the sustained damage part while radiant, it does not have to be a solar weapon. It could be any weapon type, any weapon element. It will still do the Radiant Shrapnel and deal damage. It's not substantial damage, but it does help out in triggering ignitions if you do rock Ember of Ashes in this kit instead of Empyrean or any of the other fragments. Shield Crusher would be a play if you're going for the remaining investment into grenades, so that way you can get them back faster and deal increased damage for more offensive capabilities. However, if you're not, don't use it. The last one's going to be Elemental Overdrive. Picking up an Elemental Pickup or Tango grants increased damage to weapons of the same element. Since this kit is revolving around fire sprites and we're building up constantly, we're always going to have this up for pretty much the entire time we're using this kit. So taking advantage of this to buff our solar damage on top of Solar Surge on our boots, you're going to pump up some damage. It's definitely going to boost up your weapons even further. So if you're planning to build this into a raid DPS scenario, definitely Elemental Overdrive to bump up your solar weapon damage overall, and especially for DPS. However, for more casual content, if you're using grenades more often, Shield Crushers to play. And that's it for the video. That's pretty much the kit in its entirety. I gotta say, I was very surprised about this build. I thought this build was going to be niche and was going to be mid-tier at best. But honestly, it's pretty fun. And also, it's mostly because the hammer right now is kind of bugged, so it's just bouncing all over the place. So hopefully Bungie fixes that soon, but we'll see what happens with that. But I gotta say, this kit's going to be fun. You're definitely going to have fun with this one. Now, keep an eye out for the next video because I got a Strand build for y'all coming out. That's not what you think. It's not using Worm Gods. It's using another exotic that got buffed, and it puts out. So hopefully y'all enjoyed this. Again, let me know what you thought down below in the comments. Like, comment, subscribe if you did. And I'll catch you in the next one. And don't you ever forget to keep it chill.